You've been knocked down. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe a relationship ended. Maybe a project failed spectacularly. Maybe you're just stuck in a life that feels like it's slowly suffocating you, and everyone around you is giving you the same advice. Get back on track. Return to normal. Find your way back to where you were. But what if I told you that's the worst advice you could possibly follow? What if the path forward isn't back to the center, but out to the edges? Welcome. Today we're going to explore one of the most counterintuitive truths about transformation, comeback, and real change. And we're going to do it through the profound wisdom of Joseph Campbell, the mythologist who decoded the universal pattern of human transformation. Campbell spent his life studying heroes from every culture and time period, and he discovered something that changes everything about how we understand comebacks, recovery, and reinvention. He said, "I have found that you have only to take that one step toward the gods, and they will then take 10 steps toward you. That step, the heroic first step of the journey, is out of or over the edge of your boundaries, out of or over the edge of your boundaries. Not back to the center, not back to safety, not back to what was comfortable. The edge." In this video, we're going to explore 5 reasons why your comeback, your transformation, your renaissance starts at the edges, not at the center. 5 reasons why the path forward requires you to go to the places that scare you most. If you're ready to understand why every great comeback in history started at the boundary between the known and unknown, stay with me. Because what you're about to learn will completely change how you approach every challenge, every setback, every moment when life demands that you transform. Let's begin. Who was Joseph Campbell and why edges matter? Before we dive into the 5 reasons, you need to understand who Joseph Campbell was and why his insights about edges and boundaries are so revolutionary. Joseph Campbell wasn't just an academic who studied myths. He was someone who lived the edge himself. In 1929, just as the Great Depression hit, Campbell graduated from Columbia University and was supposed to follow the conventional path. Get a good job, build a career, play it safe. Instead, he did something radical. He moved to a cabin in Woodstock, New York, and spent 5 years reading. No job, no income, no security. He was literally living on the edge of society's expectations, on the boundary between acceptable and unacceptable choices. By every conventional measure, he was failing. By every social standard, he was wasting his potential. But Campbell understood something profound. He understood that transformation doesn't happen at the center. It happens at the edges. Those 5 years of living on the boundary, of refusing to conform, of staying in that uncomfortable liminal space, became the foundation of all his groundbreaking work. It was there at the edge that he developed the insights that would revolutionize our understanding of mythology, storytelling, and human transformation. His magnum opus, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, published in 1949, revealed a pattern that exists in every great story from every culture, the hero's journey. And at the heart of that journey is one critical moment. The moment when the hero crosses the threshold. The moment when they step over the edge of their known world into the unknown. Campbell called this crossing the threshold, and he observed something crucial. Every hero must cross this threshold. There is no transformation without it. There is no comeback without leaving the familiar behind. He wrote, once having traversed the threshold, the hero moves in a dream landscape of curiously fluid, ambiguous forms, where he must survive a succession of trials. Notice that language. Curiously fluid, ambiguous forms. This isn't the solid, predictable world of the center. This is the edge, where nothing is certain, where everything is in flux, where you must navigate by intuition rather than maps. And here's what Campbell understood that most people miss. The edge isn't just a place you visit briefly and then return to the center. The edge is where all real growth happens. The edge is where you become someone new. The edge is where comebacks are forged. Now let's explore exactly why your comeback starts there. Reason 1. The edge is where old identities die. The first reason your comeback starts at the edges is the most fundamental. It's where old identities die. And you cannot become someone new until the old you dies. Let me be blunt about this. If you're trying to make a comeback while clinging to your old identity, you're not making a comeback. You're just trying to resurrect a corpse. Campbell understood this deeply. He wrote about it in terms of death and rebirth, one of the most universal mythological patterns. The hero must die symbolically before they can be reborn as something greater. But here's what most people miss. That death can't happen at the center. At the center, you're surrounded by everything that reinforces who you were. Your old relationships, your old habits, your old self-concept, your old story about yourself. You know that voice in your head that says, this is just who I am. This is just how I operate. I've always been this way. That voice is strongest at the center. That voice will kill your comeback before it even begins. The edge is where that voice loses its power. Because at the edge, you can't be who you were. The old rules don't apply. The old strategies don't work. The old identity simply cannot survive in this new terrain. Campbell talked about this using the metaphor of the belly of the whale. In the hero's journey, there's often a moment where the hero is swallowed, consumed, taken into darkness. Jonah in the whale, Pinocchio swallowed by the giant fish. This is symbolic death, total dissolution of the old self. And where does this happen? At the threshold, at the edge between the known world and the unknown. You have to go to that boundary to experience that death. Think about the great comebacks in history. Muhammad Ali losing his title, being banned from boxing, Steve Jobs getting fired from Apple, J.K. Rowling at rock bottom, divorced, broke, and depressed. In every case, they were forced to the edge. And at the edge, their old identity had to die. Ali couldn't be the brash young champion anymore. Jobs couldn't be the untouchable innovator. Rowling couldn't be the person who had everything figured out. Those identities died, had to die, because they weren't adequate for what came next. Here's the hard truth. Your old identity is probably what got you into trouble in the first place. The beliefs you held, the strategies you used, the person you were being. Something about that wasn't working. Something about that led to the breakdown. And you can't fix that by going back to the center and doing more of the same. You have to go to the edge, where the old you can't survive, where you're forced to become someone new. Campbell said it beautifully. To stay beyond your time is to putrefy. Without the blood and tearing and pain, there is no new life. Let that sink in. To stay beyond your time is to putrefy. If you cling to your old identity past its expiration date, you rot from the inside. The comeback requires that you let that old self die. And that death happens at the edges. At the edge, you don't have the luxury of pretending to be who you were. At the edge, you're stripped down to your essence. And from that essence, something new can be born. But only if you're willing to let the old die first. This is why most people never make real comebacks. They retreat to the center. They try to rebuild what was. They desperately cling to their old identity. And in doing so, they miss the opportunity for transformation that only exists at the edge. Your comeback doesn't start when you return to who you were. It starts when you're willing to stand at the edge and let that person die. Reason 2. The edge is where you find resources you didn't know existed. The second reason your comeback starts at the edges is more surprising. It's where you discover resources, strengths, and capacities you didn't know you had. At the center, you use the same resources over and over. The same skills, the same knowledge, the same strategies, the same network. And if those resources were sufficient, you wouldn't need a comeback. The fact that you do need one means those familiar resources have been exhausted. But at the edge, everything changes. You're forced to reach deeper. You're forced to tap into parts of yourself you've never accessed before. You're forced to develop new capacities because the old ones simply don't work here. Campbell called this supernatural aid. In the hero's journey, once the hero crosses the threshold into the unknown, they often receive help from unexpected sources. A magical weapon, a wise guide, a hidden power. These aids appear precisely because the hero ventured to the edge. Now, Campbell wasn't being literal about magic. He was pointing to something psychological and profoundly real. When you push yourself to your limits, when you venture beyond your comfortable boundaries, you access parts of yourself that remain dormant at the center. Think about it. When was the last time you discovered something new about yourself while staying in your comfort zone? Never. Discovery happens at the boundary. Growth happens at the edge. I'll give you a concrete example. Let's say you've always been someone who works within hierarchies, who follows established paths, who colors inside the lines. Then you lose your job. You're at the edge now, and suddenly you discover you have an entrepreneurial capacity you never knew existed. You discover you can create something from nothing. You discover you're actually resourceful and innovative when the structure is removed. That capacity was always there, but you never accessed it because you never needed to. At the center, with all the familiar resources available, that dormant strength stayed dormant. Or maybe you've always been independent, self-reliant, proud of never needing help. Then life brings you to your knees. You're at the edge, and you discover that you're capable of vulnerability. You discover that asking for help isn't weakness but wisdom. You discover that connection and community are resources far more powerful than solo strength. Again, that capacity was always there, but the center didn't demand it of you. The edge does. Campbell observed this pattern everywhere. The hero enters the unknown and encounters threshold guardians, creatures or forces that test them. And in passing those tests, the hero discovers abilities they didn't know they possessed. Luke Skywalker discovers the Force. Harry Potter discovers magic. Frodo discovers courage beyond anything he imagined. These aren't just fantasy metaphors. They're pointing to the real psychological truth that transformation reveals hidden resources. But here's the critical point. You only discover these resources by going to the edge. They don't reveal themselves at the center. They can't. The center is too comfortable, too familiar, too safe. You never need to dig that deep because you can get by with what you already know. The edge demands more. And in demanding more, it reveals more. More of who you can be. More of what you're capable of. More resources than you ever imagined you had. Campbell said that when you take that one step toward the gods, they take 10 steps toward you. What does that mean, practically? It means when you step to the edge, when you venture beyond your boundaries, resources appear. Doors open. People show up. Capacities emerge. Opportunities manifest. Not because of magic, but because you've placed yourself in a position where those resources are necessary. And necessity is the great revealer. It shows you what you're truly capable of when comfortable options are removed. Your comeback starts at the edge because that's where you discover you're far more resourceful than you believed. That's where hidden strengths emerge. That's where you stop being the person you thought you were and start becoming the person you actually are. And that person, the one revealed at the edge, has capacities that the comfortable center version of you never dreamed of. Reason 3. The edge is where you escape the pull of the familiar. The third reason your comeback starts at the edges is perhaps the most practical. It's where you finally escape the gravitational pull of the familiar. And that pull is far stronger than you realize. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. The center is a trap. Not because it's bad, but because it's so seductive. The center offers comfort, predictability, the illusion of safety, and those things are incredibly hard to leave, even when they're destroying you. Campbell talked about this as the refusal of the call. In the hero's journey, when the call to adventure first comes, the hero almost always refuses. Why? Because leaving the familiar is terrifying, even when the familiar is slowly killing them. Campbell wrote about people who stay in what he called the wasteland, a place where everything looks fine on the surface, but is spiritually dead underneath. People stuck there aren't necessarily suffering, obviously. They're just not truly alive. They're going through the motions, following the script, living someone else's idea of a good life. And here's the problem. When you try to make a comeback from within the center keeps pulling you back into old patterns because everything at the center is set up to maintain the status quo. Your neural pathways, your relationships, your environment, your daily rhythms, all of it is optimized for staying the same. You tell yourself you'll change. You make plans. You set goals. And within days or weeks, you're right back where you started. Why? Because you never left the gravitational field. You stayed at the center, where the pull of the familiar is strongest. The edge is different. At the edge, that gravitational pull weakens. You're far enough from the center that the old patterns don't have the same hold. You're in unfamiliar territory, where you have to make conscious choices rather than running on autopilot. Think about people who make radical changes by changing their environment. They move to a new city. They change careers entirely. They leave a relationship. From the center, these moves look extreme, even reckless. But from the perspective of transformation, they're necessary because they physically remove the person from the gravitational field of the familiar. Campbell understood this. His concept of the forest of adventure, the place where there is no path, is about going somewhere that doesn't have established patterns, established ways of being. You have to figure it out fresh. You have to be present and conscious because you can't rely on habit. Here's a powerful example from Campbell's own life. During those 5 years in Woodstock, he was physically removed from academia, from career, expectations, from the social pressures of New York City. He was at the edge geographically and socially, and that distance from the center is precisely what allowed him to think in revolutionary new ways. If he'd stayed in New York, taken a conventional academic job, stayed at the center, the pull of academic orthodoxy would have shaped his thinking. He would have published acceptable papers, made incremental contributions, had a respectable career. But he would never have written The Hero with 1,000 Faces. That required distance from the center. It required time at the edge. Now, I'm not saying you have to physically move or quit everything, but I'm saying that your comeback requires creating distance from whatever was pulling you into patterns that weren't serving you, and that distance is easiest to create at the edges. At the edge, you break the spell that says this is just how things are, the spell that says you can't change, the spell that says the familiar, even if it's suffocating you, is safer than the unknown. Campbell had a beautiful way of talking about this. He said that crossing the threshold was like being born. At first, you're warm and snug in the womb. That's the center, safe, comfortable, known. But then comes a signal that it's time to leave, and to stay beyond that time is to putrefy. Birth requires leaving the womb. It requires going through the painful, terrifying process of passing through the birth canal. That's the edge, the threshold between one world and another. And on the other side, life. Real life. Not the safe simulation of life inside the womb, but actual existence in the world. Your comeback requires that same passage, from the womb of the familiar into the reality of the unknown. And that passage happens at the edges, where the familiar finally releases its grip on you. Reason 4. The edge is where meaning is forged. The fourth reason your comeback starts at the edges goes deeper. It's where meaning is forged, and without meaning, there is no comeback. There's just recovery, there's just getting back to baseline, but not transformation. Campbell spent his entire career studying one fundamental question: what makes life meaningful? And his answer, drawn from thousands of myths across all cultures and time periods, was always the same. Meaning comes from the journey, specifically from the trials faced and overcome, from the threshold crossed, from the transformation earned. He said, the goal of the journey is a transformation of consciousness through trials and illuminations. Not comfort, not safety, not returning to what was. Transformation through trials. And where do trials exist? Not at the center. At the center, life is managed, controlled, predictable. The center is designed to minimize trials. But the edge is where trials live. The edge is where you face what you're made of. Here's something crucial that Campbell understood. Meaning doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from becoming who you need to be. And you only become that person by facing challenges that demand growth. Think about the stories that inspire you. The films, books, and real-life tales that move you. Are they about people who stayed comfortable? About people who never risked anything? About people who played it safe? Never. They're about people who went to the edge, who faced the dragon, who ventured into the unknown, who risked everything. Why do those stories inspire you? Because they demonstrate what Campbell called the hero's gift. The person who goes to the edge and returns transformed doesn't just change themselves. They bring back something valuable for their community. A new way of seeing, a new possibility, a new truth. Your comeback isn't just about you getting back on your feet. If it's truly a comeback, it's about you becoming someone who can offer something more valuable than you could before. And that only happens through the trials of the edge. Campbell talked about the elixir, the treasure, the ultimate boon. The hero goes into the unknown and returns with something precious. But that precious thing isn't found lying around at the center. It's forged in the fire of the edge. It's earned through the trials of transformation. Let me make this concrete. If you lose your business and then rebuild the exact same business, you've recovered. Fine. But if you lose your business, go through the fire of that loss. Discover something about yourself and about business that you never knew, and then create something new based on that hard-won wisdom. That's a comeback. That's the elixir, that's the gift. The difference is the edge. The difference is going deep enough into the trial that you come out transformed, not just recovered. Campbell said something profound about this. He said, "It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." Read that again. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure. The very place of your breakdown, your failure, your loss, that's where the treasure is hidden. But only if you're willing to go into that abyss. Only if you're willing to descend to the edge. Most people avoid that. When they stumble, they quickly get back up and pretend it didn't happen. They put on a brave face and push forward. But Campbell is saying, no, go down into that stumble. Examine it. Learn from it. Let it transform you, because that's where the treasure is. The edge is uncomfortable precisely because it's where meaning is made. It's where you forge the story that you'll tell about this chapter of your life. And a story without trials isn't inspiring. It's boring. More importantly, it's not transformative. Campbell's entire life work was about showing that meaningful existence requires the journey, requires crossing thresholds, requires facing the edge. You can have a comfortable life at the center. You can have a safe life there. But you cannot have a meaningful life there. Meaning requires the risk, the trial, the transformation of the edge. Your comeback starts at the edge because that's where you transform pain into wisdom, loss into insight, breakdown into breakthrough. That's where meaning is forged. And without meaning, you're just going through the motions of recovery, not experiencing the transformation of a true comeback. Reason 5. The edge is where you discover your unique path. The fifth and final reason your comeback starts at the edges is perhaps the most liberating. It's where you discover your unique path, your actual path, not the one prescribed by others. Campbell had a famous phrase, follow your bliss, and most people misunderstand it completely. They think it means do whatever feels good, pursue pleasure, avoid difficulty. But that's not what Campbell meant at all. He said if you follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living, your unique track. The life you ought to be living. Not the life society expects. Not the life your parents planned. Not the life that looks impressive from the outside. Your life, the one your soul is calling you toward. And here's the crucial part. You cannot find that track at the center. Because the center is crowded with other people's paths, other people's expectations, other people's definitions of success. At the center, you follow the well-worn paths. You do what everyone else is doing. You pursue what society values. But at the edge, all those paths fall away. At the edge, there is no path. Campbell loved the story of the Knights of the Round Table. When they set out to find the Holy Grail, they decided it would be a disgrace to go together on the path everyone else took. So each knight entered the forest at the point where it was darkest and there was no path. No path. Let that sink in. They specifically chose to go where there was no established way, because that's the only way to find your own way. Your comeback, if it's going to be authentic, requires that you find your own path, not recover someone else's path for you, not return to the path everyone expects you to walk, but discover the path that's uniquely yours. And that path only reveals itself at the edges, at the boundary between the known and unknown, in the place where you can't rely on maps made by others, because no one has been exactly where you are. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because there's no guarantee, there's no formula, there's no 5-step program that will definitely work. But liberating because you're finally free to discover what's actually true for you, not what's supposed to be true, according to conventional wisdom. Campbell understood that every person's journey is unique. Yes, there's a universal pattern, the monomyth, the hero's journey. But within that pattern, every individual finds their own specific challenges, their own specific gifts, their own specific transformation. You're not here to replicate someone else's success. You're here to live your own myth, as Campbell would say, to discover what makes you feel most alive, to find what he called your bliss, that thing that engages you so completely that you lose track of time, that connects you to something greater than yourself. And the edge is where that discovery happens. Because at the edge, you're forced to rely on your own inner guidance. You can't look to others for validation, because others aren't on your path. You can't follow conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom doesn't apply in uncharted territory. You have to trust yourself. You have to listen to that inner voice. You have to follow the thread of your own interest, your own passion, your own aliveness. And in doing so, you discover the path that was always there, waiting for you to be brave enough to walk it. Campbell said that when you follow your bliss, doors open that you didn't even know were there. But you have to trust it. You have to take that first step over the edge of your boundaries before you know you'll be supported. This is the ultimate reason your comeback starts at the edge. Because the edge is where you stop living everyone else's life and start living your own. Where you stop following prescribed paths and start creating your own. Where you stop performing and start actually being. Most people never make this discovery. They spend their entire lives at the center, following paths laid out by others, meeting expectations, checking boxes, and they wonder why, despite all their achievements, they feel unfulfilled. The answer is simple. They never went to the edge. They never crossed the threshold into their own unique journey. They never discovered the path that was actually theirs to walk. Your comeback is your opportunity. It's life saying the old path didn't work. The old way wasn't yours. Now you have a chance to find the path that actually is. But only if you're willing to go to the edge. Only if you're willing to enter the forest where there is no path. That's where your true comeback begins. Not in recovery. Not in returning to what was. But in discovering what could be. In finding the life that was always meant to be yours. Integration. The heroes return, so let's integrate everything we've discovered. Your comeback starts at the edges for 5 profound reasons. 1. The edge is where old identities die, and you must let the old you die before the new you can be born. 2. The edge is where you discover resources you didn't know you had. Hidden strengths, dormant capacities, unexpected allies. 3. The edge is where you escape the gravitational pull of the familiar, where old patterns finally lose their grip and you can choose differently. 4. The edge is where meaning is forged, where trials transform into wisdom, where pain becomes purpose, where your story becomes inspiring instead of just tragic. 5. The edge is where you discover your unique path, the life that's actually yours to live, not the one prescribed by others. Now here's what Campbell understood that ties all of this together. The journey to the edge isn't the end, it's the beginning of something greater. Because after the hero ventures into the unknown, faces trials, transforms, there's one more crucial stage, the return. The hero must come back to the ordinary world, but they don't come back as they left. They return transformed, carrying the elixir, the gift, the wisdom earned at the edge, and they offer that gift to their community. This is the completion of the comeback. Not just personal transformation, but the offering of that transformation in service of something larger. Campbell wrote, "The objective of the journey is to bring the same feeling of being alive into the ordinary world, to see the radiance everywhere." That's what a true comeback looks like. You go to the edge, you face your trials, you transform, and then you return to share what you've learned. You bring the gift back. You offer your hard-won wisdom to others still struggling at the center. Maybe you lost everything and rebuilt from nothing. That's the edge. But the comeback is complete when you use that experience to help others who are where you were. When you become the mentor for someone else's journey. Maybe you faced your deepest fears and discovered courage you didn't know you had. That's the edge. But the comeback is complete when that courage inspires others to face their own fears. When your example gives someone else permission to be brave. Maybe you broke free from expectations and found your own path. That's the edge. But the comeback is complete when your example shows others they too can choose authenticity over approval. When your freedom gives others courage to seek their own. This is what Campbell meant by the hero's gift. You don't just transform for yourself. You transform to bring something back, to elevate your community, to light the way for others. Your comeback isn't just about you getting back up. It's about you becoming someone who can lift others up. And that process, that transformation, that gift, all of it is forged at the edges. Conclusion, your moment at the threshold, so here you are, at the end of this journey with me, but potentially at the beginning of your own. If you're facing a setback, a loss, a moment when everything you built has crumbled, you're standing at a threshold right now. You're at the edge between who you were and who you could become, between the life you had and the life that's possible, and you have a choice. You can try to retreat back to the center, back to what's familiar, back to safety. You can try to rebuild what was, to recover what you lost, to return to the version of you that already existed. Or you can step over the edge. You can cross the threshold. You can enter the territory where there is no path and forge your own way forward. Campbell reminds us that step, the heroic first step of the journey, is out of or over the edge of your boundaries, and it often must be taken before you know that you will be supported. Before you know you'll be supported. That's the leap. That's the act of faith. You don't get guarantees. You don't get certainty. You have to step into the unknown, trusting that the path will reveal itself as you walk it. But Campbell also promises this. If you take that one step toward the gods, they will take 10 steps toward you. If you step to the edge, resources appear, doors open, your own hidden strengths emerge. The path that was always there for you reveals itself. Every great comeback in history started at the edges. Every transformation worth talking about began with someone brave enough to leave the familiar behind. Every inspiring story we tell involves a hero who crossed a threshold, faced the unknown, and returned transformed. Your story could be one of those. But only if you're willing to go to the edge. I know it's terrifying. I know every instinct tells you to play it safe, to protect yourself, to retreat to what's known. But Campbell spent his life studying human transformation, and his message is clear. Safety at the center is an illusion. Real security comes from knowing you can face the unknown and survive. Real strength comes from discovering resources you didn't know you had. Real meaning comes from trials that force you to grow. The edge is calling. You can feel it, or you wouldn't be watching this. Something in you knows that the path forward isn't backward, that the comeback you need isn't a recovery, but a transformation, that the person you need to become is waiting for you at the boundary of your current understanding. Campbell says, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The edge you're avoiding is exactly where your comeback begins. The threshold you're afraid to cross is the gateway to the life you're meant to live. So what's it going to be? Will you retreat to the center and try to rebuild what was? Or will you have the courage to step to the edge and discover what could be? The choice is yours. But I'll tell you this. If you choose the edge, if you choose the threshold, if you choose transformation over recovery, you won't just make a comeback. You'll discover who you really are. You'll forge meaning from your trials. You'll find your unique path. And you'll bring back a gift that makes everything you went through worthwhile. Your comeback starts at the edges. The question is, are you ready to step there? Thank you for being here. Thank you for considering that there might be another way. Thank you for being brave enough to imagine transformation, not just recovery. Now go, face your threshold, cross into the unknown, and discover the hero that's been waiting inside you all along. Your journey begins at the edge, and I promise you, it's worth it.